The small town of Brookhaven always seemed quiet on the surface, its streets lined with neatly kept houses and blooming gardens, but beneath the picturesque charm there simmered an unspoken tension, one that no one liked to address openly. In the middle of this town, a young couple, Erica and Marcus Hughes, had just begun to make a life for themselves. Erica was radiant, 6 months pregnant with their first child, and Marcus, an FBI agent, was deeply devoted to his family. Together they represented hope and resilience in a community that often made them feel like outsiders. It was a warm Friday evening when the incident happened, the kind that would change everything. Erica had run a simple errand, picking up groceries for the weekend, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly as she moved through the aisles. The cashier had smiled kindly, her usual routine undisturbed, until Erica stepped out into the dimly lit parking lot. That was where Officer Ryan Calloway came into the picture. Calloway was infamous in Brookhaven. Tall, broad-shouldered, and perpetually stern, he had a reputation for taking his authority too far, especially when it came to minorities. His presence often evoked a sense of unease, his piercing eyes scanning for anything or anyone he deemed suspicious. When he spotted Erica placing her bags into the car, his mind jumped to conclusions, fueled by his own biases. The confrontation started small, a simple demand for identification. Erica, confused but calm, explained that she was just heading home. Her tone was steady, her demeanor respectful. But Calloway didn't see Erica as a neighbor, a mother-to-be, or even a human being deserving of courtesy. His suspicion escalated into hostility, and hostility turned into aggression. Words were exchanged, sharp and biting. Then, in a moment of shocking cruelty, Calloway shoved Erica violently. She stumbled, her hands instinctively reaching to protect her unborn child. A cry of pain escaped her lips as she hit the ground, clutching her stomach. Witnesses froze, their shock and fear paralyzing them. Calloway barked orders, his voice a chilling echo in the night. But his authority was now overshadowed by the cries of a woman he had brutalized. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the time Marcus received the call, Erica had been rushed to the local hospital. The words of the witness who contacted him blurred in his mind. "Your wife, a cop." She fell. His heart pounded in his chest as he sped through the quiet streets, his thoughts racing faster than his car. When he arrived, Erica was lying on the hospital bed, her face pale but defiant. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach, and the faint beeping of the fetal monitor brought him a shred of relief. Their baby was okay, but the emotional wounds were glaring. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice was trembling. "The baby's fine, but Marcus, he kicked me. He thought I was stealing or something." The words felt surreal as they left her lips. Erica had always been cautious in this town. She knew how they were seen, how they had to tread carefully. But no amount of carefulness could have prepared her for the humiliation and violence of that night. His fists clenched as a surge of anger coursed through him. The FBI trained him to remain calm under pressure, to analyze situations without emotion clouding his judgment. But this wasn't just a case, it was his family, his wife, his unborn child, and the man responsible for their pain wasn't a shadowy criminal or a nameless threat. It was a uniformed officer who was supposed to protect them. The hospital's waiting room was filled with murmurs. A few neighbors who had witnessed the incident had come to check on Erica. Their expressions ranged from guilt to outrage, but none dared to openly criticize Calloway. His power in Brookhaven was unspoken but absolute. He had a network of allies within the department and a way of twisting narratives to suit his needs. Marcus knew this well. Calloway had a history of using his badge as a shield for his bigotry, and complaints against him had a way of mysteriously disappearing. Later that night, as Erica slept fitfully in her hospital bed, Marcus stepped outside to clear his head. The air was cool, but his thoughts burned. He recalled the stories he had heard from colleagues about Calloway's unchecked behavior. Marcus had always believed in the system, in its capacity to correct its flaws. But now, faced with the undeniable reality of what had happened, he wondered if that faith had been misplaced. The next day, Marcus began his investigation, not as an FBI agent, but as a husband and father-to-be. He retraced Erica's steps at the grocery store, speaking to employees and other witnesses. Most were hesitant to talk, their fear of Calloway evident. One young cashier, however, found the courage to recount what she had seen. "He was on a power trip," she said. "He didn't do anything wrong. She was just loading her car." And then? He just snapped. Marcus recorded every detail, documenting the incident with meticulous care. He knew he had to approach this carefully. As much as he wanted to confront Calloway directly, he understood the implications of such an action. Calloway would deny everything, and without concrete evidence, the system would side with him. Meanwhile, Erica's story began to circulate through the community. Friends and neighbors reached out, offering support, but there was an undercurrent of fear. People knew what Calloway was capable of, and few were willing to openly oppose him. Despite the isolation, Erica refused to be silenced. "He needs to be held accountable," she told Marcus. "Not just for me, but for everyone he's hurt." Marcus spent hours poring over Calloway's record, which wasn't easy to access. As an FBI agent, he had resources, but even those had limits when it came to internal police matters. What he found, however, was damning. Calloway had been accused of misconduct multiple times. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation. It was a pattern of abuse that the department had willfully ignored. The tension reached a boiling point when Marcus requested a meeting with the Brookhaven police chief. Chief Alderman was an old-school officer, a man who believed in loyalty above all else. Marcus presented his findings, laying out the facts with a calmness that belied the storm within him. Alderman listened, his expression unreadable, but when Marcus finished, the chief leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Agent Hughes, I understand your concern," Alderman said, his tone measured, "but you have to understand. Calloway is one of our own. He's been on the force for over a decade. He's respected by his peers." "Respected?" Marcus's voice rose, his composure slipping. "He assaulted my wife. She's 6 months pregnant. How can you justify protecting him?" Alderman's gaze hardened. "I'm not justifying anything, but these are serious accusations and we need to follow protocol. Without concrete evidence, my hands are tied." Marcus left the station feeling more frustrated than ever. The system he had dedicated his life to seemed determined to protect its own, no matter the cost. He knew he couldn't let this go. Not for Erica, not for their child, and not for the countless others who had suffered under Calloway's abuse. That evening, Marcus sat with Erica, sharing his frustrations. "They're going to bury this," he said, his voice heavy, "unless we do something." Erica reached for his hand, her strength steadying him. "Then we fight. Together." With Erica's encouragement, Marcus decided to take a different approach. He contacted a trusted journalist he had worked with in the past, someone known for exposing corruption and holding those in power accountable. Together they began compiling a report, one that not only detailed Calloway's actions, but also exposed the systemic failures that allowed him to operate with impunity. As the story came together, the couple faced increasing pressure. Anonymous threats began to arrive. Calls, notes left at their door. It was clear that someone wanted to silence them. But Erica and Marcus refused to back down. Their determination only grew, fueled by the support of those who believed in their cause. The community began to stir. Quiet conversations turned into public outcry as more people came forward with their own stories of Calloway's misconduct. The fear that had once silenced them began to dissipate, replaced by a collective demand for justice. Calloway, however, remained defiant, confident in the protection of his badge. But Marcus knew that confidence would be his downfall. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Calloway could have anticipated. Marcus and the journalist had worked tirelessly to build an airtight case, combining witness testimonies, photographic evidence from Erica's injuries, and a trove of Calloway's previous complaints. Their report, explosive and undeniable, was published on the front page of the state's most prominent newspaper. The headline read, "Pattern of Abuse, Brookhaven Officer Accused of Assaulting Pregnant Woman." The story sent shockwaves through the community. For years, Calloway had hidden behind his uniform, shielded by a system designed to protect its own. Now his actions were laid bare for everyone to see. The article didn't just recount Erica's ordeal. It highlighted the systemic failures that had allowed Calloway to thrive, painting a damning picture of the department's complicity. The response was immediate. Protests erupted outside the Brookhaven police station, led by residents who had finally found the courage to speak out. Signs demanding justice waved in the air, and chants of "accountability for all" echoed through the town. Local news stations covered the protests, amplifying the calls for change. Calloway, once so sure of his untouchable status, found himself under intense scrutiny. The department, now faced with mounting public pressure, launched an internal investigation. Calloway was placed on administrative leave, but to Marcus and Erica it wasn't enough. They knew this was a stalling tactic, a way to pacify the public while the department figured out how to salvage its reputation. In the midst of this chaos, Marcus received an unexpected call. Chief Alderman wanted to meet privately. The invitation was laced with tension, but Marcus agreed. The meeting took place in the chief's office, the walls adorned with plaques and photos that told a story of tradition and pride. Alderman's face was drawn, his usual stoicism replaced with weariness. "You've put us in a difficult position, Agent Hughes," Alderman began, his voice low. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Chief, Calloway put you in this position. I'm just making sure everyone sees it." Alderman leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. "Do you think this is justice? Dragging this department through the mud?" Alderman said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Justice is holding people accountable, no matter what uniform they wear. You can't rebuild trust by protecting someone like him." For a moment, Alderman said nothing. Then he sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "You've made your point clear. The investigation will proceed, thoroughly." As Marcus left the station, he felt a shift in the air, not a victory, but a crack in the armor of a system that had long resisted change. Yet he knew this wasn't over. Calloway wasn't just going to fade quietly into the background. A man like him, accustomed to power, wouldn't let go without a fight. The days following the publication of the article were a whirlwind. Brookhaven, once a quiet and complacent town, had become a battleground of voices demanding justice. The protests grew larger, with residents from neighboring towns joining the cause. The community, once divided by fear and prejudice, began to unite under a common goal: to hold Calloway accountable and ensure no one else would suffer under his abuse of power. Amid the growing unrest, Marcus focused on supporting Erica. She had become a symbol of resilience in the town, her story inspiring others to speak out. Despite the emotional and physical toll, she attended rallies and community meetings, her voice steady and determined. "This isn't just about me," she told a crowd one evening. "This is about every person who's been silenced, every family that's been torn apart by injustice. It's time we stand together." Her words resonated deeply, galvanizing the crowd. The community began to organize more effectively, creating petitions, arranging legal support for victims, and pushing for policy changes within the police department. What started as outrage had evolved into a movement. Meanwhile, Calloway was unraveling. Publicly, he maintained his innocence, releasing a statement through his lawyer claiming he had acted in the line of duty and that the accusations were part of an anti-police agenda. Privately, however, he was panicking. The mounting evidence against him was impossible to ignore, and his allies within the department were beginning to distance themselves. Marcus watched from the sidelines, carefully planning his next steps. He had no intention of letting Calloway escape accountability, but he also knew that the legal system could be unpredictable. He and Erica hired a skilled civil rights attorney to represent them, ensuring that their case would be airtight. The lawsuit they filed against Calloway and the Brookhaven Police Department wasn't just about compensation. It was about forcing the system to acknowledge its failures and make meaningful changes. The legal proceedings were grueling. Calloway's defense team attempted to discredit Erica, painting her as overly emotional and implying that she had exaggerated the events of that night. But Erica's calm, consistent testimony, combined with the witness accounts and Marcus's thorough documentation, left little room for doubt. During one particularly tense day in court, Erica described the moment Calloway kicked her. Her voice was steady, but tears filled her eyes as she recounted her fear for her unborn child. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Calloway avoided her gaze, his usual bravado replaced with visible discomfort. The turning point came when Marcus took the stand. His background as an FBI agent added credibility to their case, and his testimony about Calloway's history of misconduct was damning. He spoke not only as a husband, but as a man who had dedicated his career to upholding justice. "No one is above the law," he told the court, "not even those sworn to enforce it." As the trial progressed, More victims of Calloway's abuse came forward. Their stories painted a chilling picture of a man who had used his position of power to intimidate and harm those he was meant to protect. The weight of their collective testimony was impossible to ignore. Outside the courthouse, the protests continued. Signs bearing slogans like "Justice for Erica" and "End Police Corruption" filled the streets. The media covered every development, turning the case into a national story. Marcus and Erica knew the attention was a double-edged sword. It brought necessary pressure on the system, but also made them targets for backlash. One evening, as they prepared for another day in court, Erica turned to Marcus. "Do you ever wonder if this is worth it?" she asked softly. Marcus looked at her, his expression resolute. "Every day. But then I think about our child. I think about the kind of world we want them to grow up in, and I know we're doing the right thing." Erica nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I just hope they see it that way someday." The case reached its climax when Calloway himself was called to testify. For the first time, the man who had terrorized so many was forced to answer for his actions. Under the relentless questioning of Erica and Marcus's attorney, Calloway's facade began to crumble. He stumbled over his explanations, his previous statements contradicted by the overwhelming evidence against him. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Calloway was found guilty of assault and battery, and the department was held liable for enabling his behavior. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Tears, cheers, and a palpable sense of relief. But for Marcus and Erica, the fight wasn't over. The verdict was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The attention their case had garnered sparked broader conversations about police accountability and the systemic changes needed to prevent abuses of power. They used their platform to advocate for reforms, working with community leaders and activists to push for meaningful change. Through it all, Marcus and Erica leaned on each other, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced. Their child, born a few months later, became a symbol of hope, not just for them, but for the entire community. Even with the courtroom victory, Marcus knew the story wasn't over. Calloway's conviction had left a void of anger and resentment within him, and the simmering tension came to a head just weeks after the trial. Rumors swirled around Brookhaven that Calloway had been seen near Marcus and Erica's neighborhood, despite the restraining order that had been put in place. Marcus's instincts told him the man wasn't just going to accept defeat quietly. One crisp evening, Marcus returned home from a meeting with community organizers. The sun had set, and the quiet suburban street was bathed in the amber glow of streetlights. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed a car parked a few houses down, its headlights off, but the engine running. His pulse quickened. Marcus had spent years trusting his gut, and now it screamed danger. He quickly checked on Erica, who was inside, rocking their newborn to sleep. Quietly, he locked the doors and called the local precinct, reporting the suspicious vehicle. But before the officers could arrive, Marcus heard the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. He stepped outside, his eyes scanning the darkened yard. Then he saw him, Calloway, standing near the edge of the driveway. The man looked disheveled, his once polished demeanor replaced with a wild, unhinged energy. "What are you doing here?" Marcus demanded, his voice calm but firm. Calloway smirked, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Just taking a stroll," he said, his words slurred slightly. "Funny, isn't it? All that high and mighty talk about justice, and here you are, hiding behind your nice little house." "Leave," Marcus said, stepping closer. "You've already lost. Don't make this worse for yourself." Calloway's expression darkened. "Lost?" he spat. "You think this is over? You think you've won because some jury said so? This town was mine. People like you don't get to take that away." Marcus felt a surge of anger but kept his composure. "You brought this on yourself, and if you take another step closer, you'll answer for that too." Calloway hesitated, his bravado wavering. But then, as if spurred by the weight of his own failures, he lunged forward, his movements clumsy and fueled by desperation. Marcus had anticipated it. With a swift motion, he sidestepped Calloway's attack and pinned him to the ground. "You're done," Marcus said coldly, his knee pressing into Calloway's back. "You've terrorized this town for long enough." Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Officers arrived and took Calloway into custody, adding charges of violating the restraining order and attempted assault to his already damning record. As they hauled him away, Marcus stood in the driveway, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. Inside the house, Erica met him at the door, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" she asked softly, cradling their baby. Marcus nodded. "It's over." But he knew the real victory wasn't in subduing Calloway. It was in ensuring that the system he had abused would no longer protect people like him. The confrontation was the final chapter of a personal battle, but the larger fight for justice and equality would continue. Together, Marcus and Erica would see to it that their town and their child's future would be shaped by accountability and integrity. In the weeks following Calloway's arrest, Brookhaven began to transform. The protests gradually subsided, but the movement they had sparked left a lasting imprint on the community. Changes were already underway. New policies aimed at accountability were implemented, and a civilian oversight board was established to review misconduct within the police department. For the first time, residents felt a glimmer of hope that their voices were being heard. For Marcus and Erica, life took on a new rhythm. They were no longer fighting for justice in the courtroom or facing the specter of Calloway's presence, but their mission to create a better world didn't end with his downfall. Erica continued to advocate for marginalized voices, often speaking at town halls and community events about the importance of systemic reform. Marcus, too, found himself stepping into a role he hadn't anticipated. He became a mentor for young officers in training, sharing his insights on integrity, leadership, and the true meaning of justice. His story and the courage he and Erica had shown became a cautionary tale and an inspiration for those entering the field of law enforcement. One quiet afternoon, as they sat on their porch watching their baby sleep, Erica turned to Marcus. "Do you think we made a difference?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Marcus reached for her hand, his expression thoughtful. "I think we showed people what's possible when you stand up for what's right," he said. "It's not perfect, and it's not finished, but it's a start." Erica nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I want our child to grow up in a world where they don't have to fight the way we did, where they're judged by who they are, not what they look like." "They will," Marcus said firmly, "because we won't stop until that world exists." Their journey had been grueling, marked by pain, resilience, and unyielding determination. But as they sat together, united by love and purpose, they knew they had forged something unbreakable. The road ahead would be long, but they were ready to walk it, together. And so their story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, courage and conviction could light the way to a brighter future.